Welcome to the Tom Matt Show. You are walking through the front door of the retirement zone. And now, your host, Tom Matt.
Welcome, everyone. To this week's episode of the Tom Matt Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to another outstanding, fun episode. Love talking to my friends. So easy. Love talking to you guys. Last week, Performance Living, chapter, I don't even know, 10, 11. Dr. Anthony Avellino, pediatric neurosurgeon and our subject matter expert for the performance living topic that we have on here, joining us from his studio in North Scottsdale, Arizona. Talked about Innovation 2, meaning that we've had 2 interviews about innovation, and we're probably going to have 14 more because it's just so much going on with AI and virtual learning and machine learning and all this stuff. And there's another reason why, a good segue into my guest today, Dr. Albert Cohen. He is my new bud, Director of Sports Analytics, Graduate Certificate, and Director of Actuarial Science program at Michigan State University. Go Green. He is the new Director of the Actuarial Science program. We're going to learn about what an Actuarial Science program is. I know, but I hope everybody else is going to learn. The math stuff is like, underlies everything. I mean, and that's why I'm calling this episode, everybody, It's More Than Numbers. Dr. Cohen received his PhD from Carnegie Mellon University, which means he's a kind of a smart guy. He's a super smart guy. 2007, under the supervision of David Kinderlerer. I'm sorry about that, David. I know I just totally butchered that one. Albert's research focuses on the interaction between probability and science and economics. The coolest thing about all of what Albert does is all of the side action that he's kind of pulled into his mathematician's brain, his PhD, because he's got all this cool stuff with the actuarial science and education and research, but it's also the coming into the sports analytics and graduate certificate that is surrounding the sports analytics. It's just fascinating. We're going to have a nice conversation here. I want to welcome to the radio program my new buddy, another brother from a different mother, Dr. Albert Cohen. Albert, welcome to the show, bro.
Thank you, Tom, my friends. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, man. Nice to hear your voice and see what you're doing and joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to do this. You know, first segment, you're a first timer, so it's like, and you will definitely be back. So we'll get used to talking to each other. And we've already had several conversations in our meetings and stuff. But this is your life segment. So please go right ahead and tell the listeners about yourself, your family, that Canadian background of yours and all of that. How the fascinating stories with your family and how you became a mathematician is so interesting. Go right ahead. I'll give you the signal when we're getting close to the end of the segment, but I know you're going to talk. So go right ahead, my friend.
So yeah, I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and so definitely a Canucks fan. But my mom is Brazilian, and so hence the Pelé shirt. And so Portuguese is my first language. And as a kid growing up, I was just trying to figure out, where do I fit in? Learning to speak English was actually not necessarily in school. It was playing road hockey outside with my friends. And at that time, you just melted into whatever was going on. So 1980s hockey, thinking the Battle of Alberta, Edmonton versus Calgary on CBC Hockey Night in Canada. And so you really feel like, hey, this is part of who I am. And as a kid, you just thrown into that kind of that society, and always being in between worlds, speaking Portuguese at home, but then speaking English outside, watching soccer and carnival with my mom at home, but then also, Saturday night hockey night in Canada. And my dad being a tool and die maker, was also interested in mathematics because my dad would come home and teach me math. And I've never felt uncomfortable being in between worlds just because that's how I grew up. And so thinking about interdisciplinary science has been the way I've been trained since birth. And talking a lot's interesting because, you ask my students, I do like to go on rambles and tangents because I just feel like the interesting ideas are in between. And sometimes it takes a while of just chatting with people to get those ideas out. So by the time I got to Pittsburgh to Carnegie Mellon, I was really lucky. So my advisor's last name, Kinderlerer, literally translates into child teacher. And I learned a lot from that gentleman. When I first got there, David said, hey, just talk to everybody. And at that time, in the early 2000s, quantitative finance was sort of the big thing. And we were sending a lot of folks out to Wall Street using mathematical techniques to price options and other sorts of financial derivatives. And I got really interested in it. Well, my thesis wasn't in that. Even though I trained it, my thesis was in material science. And the first real success I had scientifically with this interdisciplinary approach was using tools from quantitative finance to solve this problem that my advisor had given me in material science. And it was essentially, not to get too technical, it was a system of partial differential equations which were non-local and nonlinear. And so using some tools that I had found just by digging around in the literature and probability, I'm very proud to say that probability and partial differential equations are very well connected, and a lot of folks are now utilizing that. But at the time, I had no idea that this was something to do. I just did it because I needed a proof for my theorem for my thesis. I wanted to graduate. And so I've been very lucky just to be around people like David. I had a co-advisor at the time named David Heath, who unfortunately passed away, very famous in quantitative finance. And he had given me his PhD thesis. And he said, well, I'm not a PDE guy, a partial differential equation guy. But here you go, take a look at it. Never published it. And in that thesis, there was a lot of what I was looking for to complete my thesis. So the solution method I came up from his thesis has his name on it. And I'm very proud to share that with him. So, yeah, I guess coming to Michigan as a postdoctoral fellow at Michigan State was interesting because I came right during the Great Recession. And at that time, jobs were not as certain as they are now. Let's put it that way in academia. And I think, of course, now it's also changing, I'm sure. So staying at Michigan State after my postdoctoral fellowship wasn't necessarily guaranteed. In fact, it's quite rare you do that. Postdoctoral fellowship is just one milestone in your career, and you just get more training as you progress to being a tenure track professor. Given the macroeconomic situation at the time, when this was presented to me as a possibility to help build actuarial science as an academic specialist, I took it. And it was actually one of the best decisions I've ever made. At the time, I was a bit unsure, like, what am I doing? I trained my whole life to do research and to stay and kind of leverage the fantastic situation of all the insurance companies being local here and wanting to build an actuarial program, a full major here. And it's been one of the best decisions of my life. But even more so, are the students that I've met. We've got a lot of, 10 years later, hey, I made a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. Hey, just got married and we had our first child. Just wanted to let you know. And to me, for my wife and I, that's really the best part of the job, is just being around people, seeing them succeed. I always make the joke that we're nice to these kids because they're going to be managing our pensions. So we got to, make sure they leave with good feelings. But really, I think academia is a people job. And I think, we're probably going to talk about this, but, mathematicians were seen sort of like isolated, not necessarily engaging all the time in social, discussions, but quite opposite. I mean, we talk a lot as mathematicians. There's a lot of coffee and a lot of, searching the internet, trying to figure out how to solve your problem. But it's a very social job. And again, been one of the greatest joys of my life is just to see people succeed. And this job has helped me do that. And the last thing that's developed in this sort of progression from, being comfortable in the layers in between things to today is that actuarial science usually is a growth from a stats or a math department or business school. But actuarial science has now given birth to two programs. One is called quantitative risk analytics, and the other one is sports analytics. And this is quite rare. In fact, we are on the Big Ten network spotlighting our students. And one of the first things we talked about is that, actuarial science has built this program, this connection with MSU hockey, and it's become its own thing. So it really does lead to the fact that I have fantastic chairs. I have a fantastic leadership ahead of me, giving me freedom to think about things. So, yeah, just excited.
Let me hold that thought, Albert. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I got to go to break here. Let me reset this thing, everybody. Dr. Albert Cohen's our guest today. I'm telling you, this is going to be a fascinating interview. We have had several conversations about all this, and you're going to hear a guy just go off and riff on some really high-end topics. And what we want to do is break it down so that it's very conversational, and it's going to be very interesting to understand. And the more you understand about what's happening, that's why I called this episode, everybody, It's More Than Numbers. Again, Dr. Albert Cohen's with us today. You're listening to The Tom Matt Show.
This segment of The Tom Matt Show is brought to you in part by The Source of Light and Power by band leader Archival and broadcaster Mitch Anderson. Hear the sound that is endorsed by Odyssey headphones, linear tube audio, RME converters, and Peluso microphones at sourceoflightandpower.bandcamp.com.
Welcome to the Tom Matt Show.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Tom Matt Show. Thank you so much for joining us. That wonderful voice you hear when we do the bumpers in between. Yes, I've had people ask, who is that? Who is that? Well, that's Sandy. That's Sandy doing her little, she didn't want to do anything like that. So thank you again. And the people that were asking, it's like, yep, there she is. She's on here very, very, very modestly. This segment is sponsored by Craig Stiles, our Ameriprise financial advisor, and hopefully yours as well. Your Ameriprise financial advisor, Craig Stiles, can help you plan for the life you want today and well into the future. I've introduced, matter of fact, my guest today, Dr. Albert Cohen. It's more than the numbers. The reason that I met Dr. Cohen at Michigan State University was because of Craig, because Craig wanted to, and Craig has his, of course, the Desideri platform, which pushes him over the top with all of his proprietary algorithm is super sweet, and it helps us maintain what we're doing with our finances. And having Craig and Ameriprise managing our retirement zone savings, life can be brilliant, as he says. And with the right financial advisor like a Craig, you can't go wrong. All right. Here's a couple of numbers: 1-800-528-1355. Local number 517-483-4893. I've had many friends reach out to me about Craig Stiles and his help with our finances from Michigan State University and across mid-Michigan area. And if you're not in the mid-Michigan area and you're hearing this and you're someplace else here in the podcast, Ameriprise is a huge company. Craig can vet everyone for you, so you can reach out to him anytime. If you're in California or if you're in Florida or Texas or wherever, go for it. His offices are located at 2651 Coolidge Road, Suite 103, East Lansing, Michigan 48823. Here are some of the stations in and out of the network that have carried us in the past, that still carry us. I mention everybody because I'm grateful, very grateful to be on at least one radio station in our career, and we've been on a bunch of them. So it's like, here are some of the ones that have carried us and still do carry us. WGHN 92.1 in Grand Haven was the first to carry us on broadcast radio, and so proud to say that thanks to Will Team and Wendy Hart. WGIM 1240 AM is the flagship of the Michigan Talk Network. Thanks to Steve and Ivy Gruber. Appreciate them very, very much. WJRW 1340 in Grand Rapids carried us for a long time. WKLQ 1490 Muskegon Whitehall. WIPV FM 94.5 Mackinac City. And of course, the big stick, the tower at Michigan State University, carrying us on Sundays at 5 in the afternoon. AM 870 News Talk. And simulcast 102.3 FM WKAR. Again, I mentioned Desideri Analytics. That's why you want to call Craig. And we'll talk about Desideri a little bit with my guest today, Dr. Albert Cohen, because that's how you make light of weighted decisions, by having people that you can trust, and smart people help you navigate life. That's why I'm so grateful to meeting a guy like a Dr. Albert Cohen. Albert's a cool guy, does some sweet stuff, got great stories, and we immediately connected. All right, Albert. So let's get into the nitty gritty here, because it's more than numbers. You're a mathematician. You're the director of sports analytics graduate certificate and the director of Actuarial Science program. You have an event that you do annually, which we are actually going to attend, and it's coming up by the time this show airs. That event will be passed, but then the next year we can promote it for next year. Actuarial Science Simon Lecture. I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. What do you expect to see with that? What are the kind of people? It's just a nice event. Please talk about Mr. Simon and all of that. Go right ahead.
Thank you. So when I first started working postdoctoral fellowship, I met Ron and Mary. We had lunch together, and I was so impressed chatting with them that I got really excited. And I said, hey, I'd like to thank you for what you're doing. And so we would like to do one of two things. Either we write a paper and dedicate in your honor, or we have a conference in your honor. This is sort of how things work in academia. And so we decided we would do a conference/talk. And the first one was in 2012, and it was a fantastic success. We had a gentleman named Dr. Emil Valdez, who came from the University of Connecticut, and actually, after me, became the director of Actuarial Science, and I learned a lot from him, from Emil. But essentially, Ron is the retired CEO of Auto Owners Insurance, retired over a decade ago. But he's become a mentor of mine. He's somebody that when I just have a question about how do I live my life the best way, how do I interact with people, he's somebody that I'll just tap on the shoulder. The Actuarial Science program has developed simply because of the fact that our students graduate and they come back. Michigan State's very unique, Tom. in the sense that people really like each other. I've worn my green and white everywhere around North America, and I always get a go green when I'm walking.
Go white, baby.
Absolutely, man. Like I had a friend of mine who was an Italian guy, and I gave him like a Michigan State sweatshirt or jacket or something, and he was like, "Why is everybody yelling go green at me?" It's like, well, get used to it if you're going to wear this. So it doesn't stop the sports. It continues on with actuarial science. It continues on with mathematics. We really like each other as Michigan State associated people, whether you're an alumni, a parent. There's just a connection here, and Ron symbolizes that to me. So Ron basically at one time even worked with some of our students. We worked on, so basically, I would say some project work to get these kids to communicate technical ideas to perhaps a non-technical audience. And so Ron, having been the CEO of a Fortune 400 company for auto insurance, really knew how to do this. And he just imparted some of that wisdom to these kids. And I would just sit back and watch. I mean, this is somebody that just really loves being around people. And so we've been able to trade on his name, image, and likeness with this annual event. And this is a way for people in mid-Michigan and even nationally to come in and celebrate our program. And it's a way for them to see what our students are doing. It's a way for them to see a high-level talk. This year we have Dr. Ann Hoffman, who's director of the Lindner Center at the School of Business for Insurance at the University of Cincinnati. She's going to be talking about F1 racing and simulation and how do you make decisions under split seconds. Human behavior is obviously a big part of designing insurance and pricing it. So it's something that we are able to, just in totality, bring all these groups of people together, which is part of the first segment, is where I've grown up since birth. It's just being around different kinds of inquiry, whether it's music. Music's a big part of my life. You know, heavy metal music has been with me since I was a teenager, and it'll never go away. This is something that's been like my North Star. If I'm ever stressed out, if I'm ever trying to prove a theorem, it's usually Metallica in the background, or Guns N' Roses, or the things that I grew up with in the 90s.
Hold on a second, bro. We can't
Absolutely.
we can't drop a Metallica thing and say, without me asking you, what's your favorite Metallica song?
Probably Creeping Death.
Okay. Creeping Dead? I don't know.
Creeping Death.
Creeping Death. I'm going to have to look that up now. I'm not a huge there's a few Metallica songs. I'm like a bandwagoner, of course, but there's coming from a guy like you, and believe me, everybody, when we had our first meetings, this topic came up pretty quickly, and we kind of have this common thing with music and, the heavy metal thing. I have to appreciate that. My brother's a heavy metal person. I'm going to carry this through, Albert, because we're going to go to break here. Sure. But the Rush era and the Metallica era and the heavy metal era. Yeah, we're coming from the same genre here. So all of these things, and I'll look up that Creeping Death song here. Resetting this whole situation here, everybody. Dr. Albert Cohen is with us today. Why is he with us? Because we're talking about, it's more than numbers. Mathematicians, sports analytics, finance, all of the different applications that are out there with big machine learning, virtual learning, AI, everything that's going on with technology. I mean, we just had our previous show with Dr. Avellino talking about some of these aspects. It is incredible. And to understand just a little bit of what's working behind the scenes really helps make things simplify. Again, Dr. Albert Cohen's our guest today. It's more than numbers. This is the Tom Matt Show.
Thank you again to our Segment 2 sponsor, Craig Stiles of Ameriprise Financial. For more information on services provided by Craig, please visit ameripriseadvisors.com/Craig.Stiles or by calling 517-483-4893. You're tuned in to the Tom Matt Show.
Welcome to the Tom Matt Show.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Tom Matt Show. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity and the time to be with us. I appreciate that very much. There's a term called opportunity cost out there, economics thing. And it's like, you have choices out there. That's where my big thing with this as a trainer and a coach, I'm all about people making good choices. You have choices to make out there, and the opportunity cost to listen to our content, watch the videos, however you want to do it, is very important to acknowledge that and thank people, because you have other options out there, millions of things you could be doing while you're listening to this or instead of listening to this. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that very much. Dr. Albert Cohen, again, is our guest today. Dr. Cohen is the Director of Sports Analytics, Graduate Program, and Director of Actuarial Sciences at Michigan State University. And why is it important to understand what Dr. Cohen does? Well, there is so many different aspects to actuarial science and then the sports analytics. We're going to finish the thread of the Simon lecture. Dr. Cohen, I was mentioning to you during break, for me personally, I understand a tiny bit about actuarial science. I know it's a math-based thing, and it's very hard, and it's like insurance and numbers. But to give it a simplified definition for people like myself who don't know that much about it, and why that Simon lecture is important for people to perhaps attend, go ahead. Please explain in layman's terms, why it's important for people to just have a grasp on this.
Appreciate it, Tom. And thanks for giving me about 20 minutes for the caffeine to sink in and let me collect my thoughts. So in essence, in one sentence, actuarial science is about pricing and mitigating risk. Risk can find itself in mortality. So for example, you unfortunately die before you expected to, or your beneficiaries expected you to. You could also have the risk of basically outliving your pension on the other end of the spectrum. So it was called longevity risk, where we underestimate your mortality and you're 85 years old and you unfortunately run out of funds. And so thinking about what's the optimal way to control your pension, how much should you draw? And so again, one sentence, pricing and mitigating risk. And usually those risks are primarily in the mortality arena, but there's other related risks as well. You have property and casualty. For example, you're running your farm and you don't get enough rainfall. So how do you protect with that possibility? So you talk about crop insurance, or obviously car insurance, dental insurance, workers' comp insurance. And so the notion that risk is like energy, you can either create it nor destroy it, you just price it. And so for us, and I say us as in this program, I'm not an actuary, I'm a mathematician, but I'm very lucky, again, just working in the margins, working with people that do insurance. I also like to work with people in banking and finance as well. But just seeing what they do is phenomenal, because they're able to take human behavior and this sort of, reticence to talk about mortality, reticence to talk about, you should increase your car insurance because, and heaven forbid, if something was to happen, do you have enough to cover what you need? And so having that patience and the ability to elicit from people what they're really worried about and price it. And by pricing it, you can actually kind of take away some of that worry. And I think, living here in the Midwest, excuse me, living here in the Midwest, you see that there's sort of that no nonsense approach to, well, we got to fix this and we got to move on. And again, I can't think of a single person better to me that signifies that than Ron Simon. Every time I've had a chance to talk to him, it's very clear cut, very caring. And I think that's what actuarial science has progressed to become, in my opinion, having first encountered it in the mid 2000s. It's something where you price and mitigate risk, but you do it in a human way. And I think that what Ron did at Auto Owners and what the Simon lecture does by presenting people who also have that ability to look at this somewhat esoteric, abstract idea and just bring it down to a human level. I think one of Ron's legacies for the program has also been this course called Math 491B, where we teach kids how to communicate. And we teach them by just basically unleashing them on themselves and getting them a faculty or industry mentor. And that developed so well that sports analytics really came out of that. We started just talking about, well, there's data in insurance. What about data in hockey? And that's what's progressed into sports analytics. It's really that one course that Ron Simon helped us to kind of establish that kind of thinking, along with our board of our actuarial science program board gave us this idea too. So in a nutshell, just to return to the original question, actuarial science is about pricing and mitigating risk. And in the insurance field, there's many. So there's mortality, there's property and casualty. But the idea is that once you've isolated it, how much is it worth to you to get rid of it? Or at least to mitigate it, and what level of risk is acceptable to you. So we talk to a lot of folks that are behavioral science. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
So the science behind all of this, behavioral science, and when we had a conversation, my guest today, everybody, Dr. Albert Cohen. Dr. Cohen is the Director of Sports Analytics at Graduate Program and Director of Actuarial Sciences at Michigan State University. We had our conversations where you brought up philosophy and you said, for the students that we bring in, because I always like to bring students to our meetings and you give them all that great advice, but the philosophy behind the blending of these science topics, and that's where they're springing into these new areas like the sports analytics. I got to ask you, were you a fan of the book and the movie Moneyball? Did you watch any of that, or are you aware of all of that?
So one of my latest papers is on the Moneyball theorem. And absolutely, there's this one scene, obviously, with Jonah Hill is explaining to his character is explaining to Brad Pitt's character about how many wins they need to make it to the playoffs. And so to get that number of wins, there's this theorem by Bill James in the 70s. Still amazed how he came up with it, that you can link the total winning percentage of a baseball team for the whole season to the aggregate number of runs they've scored and that they've surrendered. And that formula is called the Pythagorean formula because, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So in a similar way, you say that the winning percentage is runs squared over runs squared plus opposing runs scored squared. And so that's a fraction between 0 and 1, the output value. And so that's the winning percentage between 0 and 1. And it fits extraordinarily well. But, as engineers and mathematicians love to do, we love to maybe tweak parameters. And we say, okay, why should that parameter be 2? So if you go to a lot of different baseball data sites, you see it as, let's say, 1.8. So runs to the power of 1.8 over runs to the power of 1.8, opposing runs to the power of 1.8. And it's actually, again, even a little bit better. But the question is, why stop there? And so we had this paper come out recently where we say, well, that number is actually a random variable. That number can be anything you like. And the way to do it is to look at historical winning percentages combined with historical runs scored and surrendered. And Sean Layman, who's a fantastic journalist in his own right, has given a gift to us as baseball analytics fans, and basically compiled a data set of about 150 years from, I think it was 1871 to 2022 was the last time I checked. And so I used that data set to look at what this historical parameter would be. And in fact, it's not 2. The mean is just a little bit past 2. It's about 2.2 something, but the deviation is pretty big. So if you look at over history, some teams have only played, let's say, a few number of games. But the fact that you can go back and look at from 1895 or the 1926 New York Yankees or anything like that, and just basically pinpoint what their parameter would have been. And again, talking about living in the margins, the reason I got this idea to do it this way, this implied parameter, is in quantitative finance, we do this all the time. If you say that if the Black-Scholes price for a call option was to be correct, and today's stock price, and today's interest rate, what volatility parameter would make that correct? And if that volatility parameter is different than your historical volatility for the stock that you're trying to write a derivative on, what does that tell you? And so having been trained in quantitative finance and having seen that idea over and over again, to me, I thought, why don't we try this for baseball? And when I saw that almost normal distribution looking curve around 2.2, I was just blown away. That's one of my happiest moments sitting in front of a computer.
Hold that thought, because we're going to come to break here, and I want to follow up with that and find out, when was that? When did that epiphany hit your brain? Hold the answer to that. I told you guys. This is a very fascinating topic, and we're just barely scratching the surface. You know how with first interviews with my new friends and new guests, we always do the high altitude. This is exactly where we're going with Dr. Albert Cohen today, who, again, as I've said several times, Director of Sports Analytics, graduate certificate at Michigan State, and Director of Actuarial Science program. And he's got some great stories. We'll come back. We'll talk about when the epiphany hit my friend's brain and he thought, hey, this finance stuff might work for sports. You're listening to The Tom Mann Show.
Thank you again to our Segment 3 sponsor, White Law PLLC, where justice meets compassion. White Law is your advocate in times of need. We are here to listen, support, and fight for what you deserve. Contact White Law today for your free consultation. Visit us at whitelawpllc.com or call 517-777-9785.
Welcome to the Tom Mann Show.
The fourth segment of the Tom Mann Show is sponsored by Brock Fletcher, selling team of Keller Williams Realty. Trust is his middle name. And again, full disclosure, as I have done with Craig, Brock, we utilize our services of our sponsors. We want to be transparent and crystal clear with everybody. My integrity means a lot. Learn that when I quit drinking 26 years ago. And it's like, it's a lot easier to be straight with people than to just, as my guest today, Dr. Albert Cohen, saying, playing in the margins. I think I could say you play in the margins when you're not telling the absolute truth all the time. Brock Fletcher is the guy you're going to get the absolute truth from. He helped us with Big House Hold. He helped us, thanks to Mike Dedman. What's up, Mikey? By Little House Lansing, where I'm recording this episode today with my friend, Dr. Albert Cohen. All of these things were made possible by Brock Fletcher. Again, 20 episodes on this radio show and the 14 seasons we've been doing this thing. It's like, go listen to some of those episodes. They don't cost a dime. They're free. There's all kinds of real estate stuff. There's all kinds of finance stuff. Just go to Reality of Real Estate on the Tom Matt Show website, tommattshow.com, and away you go. Phone numbers, office number for Brock Fletcher at the selling team, 517-853-6408, 517-853-6408. His cell phone number, this is the number you really want to jot down on the dust on your dash, everybody, 517-303-3262. Again, 517-303-3262. You can go online to kwsellingteam.com. You can go to tommattshow.com, bottom of the homepage. Go there, click right on through. All of our friends are there. Our sponsors are there. Sell your home without hassles like we did. Got our number. And lastly, remember the quick story about my former neighbor next door, Mike, came to me, wanted some advice, turned him on to Brock. He gave me a number. He needed to sell his house. He got a new job offer. He's a young guy, just had a baby, and they needed to go. Gave me a number. I said, I think your number's too low, but I don't know. You need to talk to my friend. Next thing I know, there's a sign in his yard from Brock Fletcher. And about a week later, he sold his house, got $20,000 extra, more than he anticipated. And it's not too bad when you make the right phone call. That will happen with Brock. Brock will answer your questions. No obligations, no pressure, no nothing. He's just a great guy, and he's a Spartan. So away we go. Thank you, Brock, for sponsoring this segment of the radio program. Dr. Albert Cohen is our guest today. It's more than numbers. Dr. Cohen is a mathematician, director of Actuarial Science program at Michigan State, as well as the Sports Analytics program, graduate certificate. Question that I posed to Dr. Cohen previous segment. When did you have the epiphany that, I don't know, the playing the margins? I'm picking up on some of your lingo here, but you're playing the margins with all of this, the finance stuff and the insurance stuff and the bond stuff and all this. And all of a sudden you have this epiphany with, hey, this might line up real well with the sports stuff, with the Moneyball stuff. So when did that occur to you? That was the question I posed to you. When that, when you have these light bulb moments, is that what happened to you? Did you have a light bulb moment?
I did. And it's that aha moment really has its history in my PhD advisor, David Kinderlehrer, Carnegie Mellon, kind of training me to just talk to different kinds of people. But specifically, it's when my current chair, Jeffrey Shanker, who's the chair of the math department, is one of the most unique and kindest humans I've ever met. And he sees the enthusiasm that I have that I share with you about just let's learn about neat stuff. He said, "Yeah, Albert, you seem to like all of these things." And I proposed, hey, I think that there's something here. I think we can use actuarial techniques, which I'll talk about in a second, financial techniques to price contracts in sports. And I don't see anybody else doing this, and full disclosure, I do have some consulting work that I do. And just being around people, you see that there's a huge interest, whether it's looking at salary cap management or whether it's looking at direct performance-driven metrics for pricing contracts. So you see this around everywhere, but there was nowhere that young people could learn to do this in one course. So I proposed this, and Jeff said, absolutely, go for it, enjoy it. Just make sure that everything else is running smoothly. And one of the metrics for that, of course, is the Simon Lecture and how big it's become. Another, of course, I think much more important to me is to see that the kids are getting jobs, and they are. And, our numbers for enrollment is up, and that's because the society that we live in trusts us, to give their young people a good education. So all of that was there. And so sitting in this class, I'd given them permission to do it. It's like, holy cow, I've got to come up with material. So one of the things I'd come up across.
Now the pressure was on, huh? Now you make this proposal. Okay, I'm going to make this beautiful cake. Okay, go for it. Now you got to figure out how to do it.
Dude, absolutely. And so one of the things I'd seen in insurance pricing is this notion of a final average compensation. So basically, if you're looking for post-retirement pensions, what salary do you get 60% of in retirement? So you work a heck of a lot of overtime and you increase your final average compensation. And so it's always a negotiation. Do I take the last 3 years or the last 5 years to average out your salary? Obviously, if you take the last 3 years, that's usually when you get a lot of your raises. And so it's a higher number. And so that number, what's that number? So I started to think about it. Well, using the Moneyball theorem, there are these two guys, Dwayne Rockerby and Stephen Easton. They've actually talked about the stuff that I teach in this class. In fact, we use one of their books as a recommended text. they talked about how this Moneyball parameter can fit into pricing a 1-year contract. And so I thought about it. Okay, fine. This gamma seems like something you're going to debate. This is something that maybe an agent, sitting across the desk from a general manager is going to say, no, you should use this gamma. So the question, what is that number? Working with a couple of my colleagues in quantitative finance, it's the same thing. How do you calibrate a model? How do you get that number? And so I started to think about it. Well, why should it be this number versus that number? You can certainly argue it, and there's certainly a case to wave your hands and say it should be this. But what is the market telling us? And so I was sitting in my office, and I thought, well, let's look at the implied gamma. We do this for finance. So this is now mixing finance with insurance. The insurance part is getting that number from, let's say, a contract perspective, like paying out a benefit, versus now, okay, what is that number I need to imply from what else? What's baseball telling me? And so sitting in my office, I just wrote maybe about 20, 30 lines of code in this language we call R for statistical computing. And boom, it's there. It's just looking at you. It's like, so 150 years worth of baseball data is just staring you at the face saying, yeah, we're a normal distribution plus a spike. And it looked like a normal distribution to me at that time. So it was probably fall of 2023, sitting in my office, just trying to get some code to explain this to the students. Ironically, I never used that in the class. I never talked about it until this year. So it's thanks to MSU giving me this leeway. In the fall of 2023, we ran it. We had between, I think, 15 and 20 students, roughly the same this year as well. There's a lot of interest from kids, but part of it is just coming up with material. Like, okay, fine, there's a book. And from that course, I've had 2 papers, one that's been published and one that's going through the review process right now. So I learn from the students as much as I can ever view upon them. I think it's actually kind of selfish to say that I love teaching simply because I get to, you have the pressure to come up with something, but these kids, I mean, they're fantastic. They don't have the same baggage we do as professional scientists, with different pressures. They just want to think about neat topics. And so selfishly, I always give them a project as part of their course grade. I just want to see what they're going to come up with. And so that spirit kind of hit me. And so it was somewhere in the fall of 2023, sitting in my office, surrounded by all my heavy metal posters and, pictures of bands when I used to have a radio show as a grad student. And just, you take that inspiration of, I've been around so many different kinds of things, and just being my authentic self, being a music fan that happens to also love sports, and math is my first passion, trying to mix all of that together.
What I love about this, Albert, is it epitomizes my retirement zone whole mentality. And it's, as I tell young people all the time, it's like the retirement zone is open to everybody. You're going to retire in your life. You are going to regroup. You're going to move. You're going to do things. And I'm actually a little bit surprised that it's so relative and relevant that this came out in 2023. That's so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's so close to where you are at. You've been thinking about this for a long time. And it's like, wow, this must have been just awesome for you to come up with this whole concept. I mean, I didn't realize it was that new. So congratulations on that. I am thrilled for you. And the other thing that you were talking about with the students, and one of the things I love about being around the university too, and what we have to do, and we can talk about this when we come back because we're going to come up on break here pretty quick. Albert Cohen's our guest today, everybody. It's more than numbers. But in working with the students at MSU, we all have it's a gift. And I've told students this, it's a gift. That's why we like doing our lunches. We like doing our meetings. You and I are going to do a lot more of this kind of stuff because the students bring us joy. We help to try to impart a little bit of knowledge with them, maybe help them make connections because that's what they need. They're super smart, but they need to have that personal touch. And so this is advice to all of us out there, everybody. Don't be afraid to reach out to these young people and give them a leg up. That's why we do so many episodes with the college students because their stories are all different. They're all fantastic human beings, and we love them so much. Just like we love our guest today, Dr. Albert Cohen. It's more than numbers. You're listening to The Tom Matt Show.
Thank you again to our segment 4 sponsor, Brock Fletcher, real estate agent at the selling team with Keller Williams Realty. For more information on services provided by Brock, please call his personal cell phone at 517-303-3262 or by emailing Brock at kwsellingteam.com. This is The Tom Matt Show.
Welcome to the Tom Matt Show.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much again for joining us today. This is Tom Matt Show. My name is Tom Matt. Dr. Albert Cohen's our guest today. It's more than numbers, talking a lot about sports analytics, quantitative finance, some really high-level math stuff that is so applicable to where we are with technology nowadays, everybody, that you really need to have at least a kind of a high-altitude understanding of what's happening behind the scenes. That's kind of how my brain works. I want to know enough to have a conversation with my friend, Dr. Albert Cohen, to be relevant, but and still be curious enough to take this and say, hey, what about this? And what about that? And that's where he's coming from. I mean, it was only in fall of 2023 that he came up with his whole program for the sports analytics graduate certificate. And, you know, it's all good. Remember, if you want to contact us, get a hold of Sandy, myself, topics, our guests, TomMattShow.com is our website. There's a contact box there. Go there. All of our information is there. All of our YouTube, all of the podcast aggregators are there. Any of the, whatever flavor you like for your podcast, if you like just the audio version, you want the YouTube version, or you want the Instagram, it's all there. It's all at TomMattShow.com. I want to get my guest contact info because we are going to be going to an event with Dr. Cohen as his guest with some other people this week, and looking forward to that very much. Dr. Cohen, how would you like people to connect with you, reach out to you, perhaps hire you for some of that side action? We all need to have something else in our lives, no doubt about it. You know, it keeps us sharp to have extra things going on in our life and having side action. How would you like people to connect with you?
Well, in general, probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me is through my email. I check my email like probably every 5 to 10 minutes. And so it's ACOHEN, so ACohen at msu.edu. I usually try to respond to people within an hour, at the most 24 hours. I'm also on LinkedIn. You just search for my name. I'm really happy to just kind of look at LinkedIn as sort of the best connecting platform that I've been able to come across. And that's actually, I've met even people at MSU, ironically, people like Darian Harris, who is one of the sharpest business minds I've ever come across. He came to our classroom, in fact, and he came and talked to our students in this contract pricing class. And just to make one point, so our contract pricing class is for undergrad students, and we have a graduate certificate. And that graduate certificate is open to anybody to apply to. We run fall, spring. You'll be a MSU student with a transcript. If you just Google MSU Sports Analytics, the online.msu.edu specific program page will come up. And you've actually got a video, folks, talking, well, specifically kind of previewing what the program would be. We've also had some podcasts with some of our current and former students in the certificate that talk about this. So in a nutshell, the best way to contact me is acohen at msu.edu. But if you'd like to learn more about this graduate certificate that anybody can apply to and take part in upon admission, that is just searching MSU Sports Analytics. And the wonderful folks here at MSU have made that search engine optimized. So it should be one of the first couple links that'll come up when you search for it. But again, LinkedIn is phenomenal. That's one of the things I do with my students is that, hey, you're about to graduate, or if you're looking for a job or anything, if you'd like, I'd be very happy to join with you on LinkedIn. And that puts you closer in the network to other people you might want to connect with for job searching, or just connecting in general. And that helps me because students that are coming up, I can say, hey, I know so-and-so, 5-10 years ago, they graduated, they're now in industry. And I'll ask that person, hey, do you mind if my student reaches out to you? It's basically just building our Spartan network.
It's so important, and that's what we do as Spartans, plug for the green machine. But we're all about helping, and that's where Albert and I connected. It's like the mutual feeling of we have more to give to our students rather than just my role at the university, his role as a professor. There's so much more to it. And it's like the people skills, the soft skills, the introductions, all of these things. These students, again, are very, very smart. They're very thirsty for meeting people, and the successful ones will gravitate towards the positives. And so it's all good. Albert, talking about all of this stuff with the sports, there's so many thoughts in my mind about this. And you brought up Darian Harris's name. And Darian and I know each other very well. He's been on the show several times. And as a matter of fact, he was just on recently. We're talking about the NIL and the future of college athletics. This is so important. Where do you think that the NIL the transfer portal, all of the athletics at the level that we are at Michigan State University as a Division I Power 5 conference. What do you see as the potentials moving forward? You've talked to some of these people within athletics. You're very active with professional sports franchises on contracts, but the NIL side of things, has that touched you much? Have you done much talking to like a Darian Harris and see the potentials here? What's your feeling on it?
Short answer is I wish I knew. I'm just starting to think about it. A lot of what I've been thinking about with my colleagues has been performance driven. So if you're scoring this many home runs, can you predict what share of revenue that you should get a piece of? But in terms of just your name, image, and likeness, also giving you a share of that revenue, that's something that I'm fascinated by. So short answer, I'm starting to think about it, starting to talk and connect with Darian. So stay tuned. But I think that there's definitely some space there for academics to work in. And you don't mind me saying, I think it's been a long time coming. This is something that I'm so glad that is finally being looked at objectively. And so short answer is watch this space.
It's very interesting. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we connected with Craig Stiles and his Decideri algorithm, because there are many different applications out there that are coming. All right. So the research in baseball and soccer analytics. I mentioned during break, everybody, that the next time I have Dr. Cohen in, we'll probably do some more talk about the gambling aspect and that industry in itself. But that's such a huge topic that we'll leave that for next time, because we really want to just talk about the top high level stuff. What about the current research in baseball and soccer analytics? What are you seeing as far as the trends? You've talked about it a little bit. How can this, because these franchises and these TV contracts and all the money that's out there, managing and mitigating loss has got to be massive with these giant contracts. I mean, the Big Ten it's like an $8 billion TV contract that they just started. I mean, it's incredible the amount of money that's out there. Please talk about all of this, the research in baseball and soccer analytics, how it all ties together.
So a colleague of mine, his name is Jimmy Risk. He's out in California. We've been working on a paper in soccer. This is one of the two papers that actually came out of the stuff that we're teaching in Math 490, which will officially be a new course called Math 362. So the paper in soccer, we looked at, okay, in a soccer game, you can have a 0-0 score, but obviously players are performing. So how do we look at and measure what is being performed and what's leading to excitement, and also look at the revenue earned for that game and figure out if we can figure out a proportional share for each player. That's a fair compensation for what they're doing. So I think that a lot of the initial research in baseball has been strategy, so what we call like in-game analytics. I'm interested also in post-game analytics, which is, what happened in that game, how do we value it? And also pre-game. I mean, optimal drafting theory. This is something that we just finished some of the new material we're talking in this Math 490 class about. Richard Thaler and Cade Massey. Thaler won the Nobel Prize in economics recently. They came up with this beautiful idea of how do you price or value a trade pick or draft pick, in the NFL. And the way they did it is ironically using the market. Well, what have trades yielded in the past? Let's use that trade data to value what the market thinks this pick is worth. So I think what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of it initially was how do we shift, in game to basically optimize our chance of winning the game. But a lot of that now I think is shifted to structural models, which is there a function that describes input leading to an output instead of just sort of a black box or a regression only? Are there sort of fundamental models like we have in physics and finance, economics? And so I think that that's one of the ways sports analytics is going. And that's certainly the part that I'm interested in. So I'm biased towards that. But I also think in terms of mathematical models of scheduling, so quantum mechanics leading to quantum computing, there's a lot of problems that you couldn't solve before, like constrained optimization and scheduling. How do I schedule a league? Right. So I've seen in Europe, there are some soccer leagues that are starting to think about this. So I think tying into mathematics and mathematical thinking is probably the next step for sports analytics, which there's been some of in terms of optimal in-game strategy, but I think pricing contracts, scheduling, and things beyond that. So a lot of it has been statistical and computing in nature. I think that what's going to happen next are what is a fundamental theorem of baseball? I know we've talked about that in physics, but if I was just to kind of dream a little bit, I think that I would love to see something like that happen. and I see signs pointing towards it.
We're gonna wrap this thing here, Albert. Dr. Albert Cohen's our guest today. I'd like a quick takeaway from you. We got a minute or so to go. What was your takeaway from your first visit to our program be?
Well, I just love sitting and chatting with you and Craig. I could see that you're very much immersed in the culture of Michigan State. And I think for anybody that's watching this program or listening to this podcast, Michigan State has a culture, just like every university does. But Michigan State's a very unique place. We all like each other. We like talking to each other. And we're dedicated to making sure that the next generation is aware of how much we appreciate them and what they've done for us. And you reflected that. So every time we've sat for lunch at Brody and just sat and chatted, and the fact that you say, hey, here's a student, talk to them. What do you they're interested in this. And I just see that in you, and I see that in Craig. And it's been a fantastic, couple months knowing you. And I hope this continues on.
Oh, it will. I appreciate you so much. Dr. Albert Cohen's our guest today, everybody. Director of Sports Analytics Graduate Program at Michigan State. Brand new. Want to check this stuff out. Unbelievable episode. Love it so much. If our show fits your business or group's mission, we want to be of service to you through our guests. Sponsorships are available. Just send us a note on the website, tommattshow.com. Got to be a fit. Got to fit. Thanks to Dr. Albert Cohen for being with us, Sandy, Craig, Brock, everybody that supports the radio program. Lastly, I like to say, always remember, before you can share love with others, you must love yourself first. Take care of yourself out there. Love yourself first, and then love your family. We will talk to you next weekend, everybody, or next week, or whenever you pick this up. Have a great day. Remember, the Tom Matt Show is a production of Boomers Rock Media. We want to bring your story to life. And lastly, I want to say thank you to our production team, Mitch Anderson and Vanessa. Thank you for what you do. We are out.
The Tom Matt Show is produced by Mitch Anderson of Black Circle Studios. Original music from The Source of Light and Power by the Arc of All.